Hey everyone, welcome once again to another episode of There's Just Something About Kansas City, where we are in conversation with the people, places, and things that make this such a great place to live. I'm not going to guarantee that this won't go off the rails quickly, okay, with these two guys in studio, and I couldn't be happier or more proud to sit down with these two guys because of all they've accomplished in their life, and then they got together. We're going to talk about all that. Of course, it's Doug Frost. A lot of people probably recognize Doug. Master of Wine and Master Sommelier, one of the few in the world that has both of those distinctions. We'll talk to him about wine. Brad Bergman over here. He is the founder, CEO, chairman of the board of Midwest Trust, a man that handles people's money and handles it very, very beautifully for them to make them very, very successful. So you sort of wonder, okay, Frank, where is this going? I mean, you got this guy, it's a money man. You got the wine guy over here. How did you two guys get together and start to work with Brad's side gig, which is your main gig, which is wine? What was the first, you remember the first encounter?
I think I'll let Doug handle that, although if you learn anything about wine, you learn that you do need some financial resources to go alongside.
Yeah, well, there is the old saying that, the only way to make a small fortune in the wine business is to begin with a large one. And we are right on schedule. We are trimming that thing down pretty fast. It's my version of the story certainly would be that Brad and I ran into each other at various events, and they were basically charitable events. Mm-hmm. And Brad was very quickly, for me, somebody I could rely upon. He'd give me that look of, okay, nobody's bidding on this. I'll do it. And that became a friendship, really. And he started sort of, coaxing me to be more aggressive about how I was trying to fundraise for these charities. And it's always been something that I just do because, you're a member of the community. Let's do something like that. And so you try to help different groups, and I'm not very good at it. And Brad kind of pushed me to be a little smarter about it all. And one thing led to another, really, that he made the comment that if you ever come up with something interesting, you let me know. And it was like, okay, yeah, that'll never happen. But if it does, I'll let you know. And then it did. Basically, somebody called me up and said, there's some land up here in Walla Walla Valley. You ought to come up here and take a look at it. And I knew the land intimately. I'd been going to Walla Walla Valley for 30 years, and I knew the wine industry up there intimately. And it was one of those things of, okay, maybe I should. And I called Brad, and he was like, let's go get on a plane.
And so for you, this was not your introduction to wine, though, at this point, was it? Was the Walla Walla Valley thing with Doug? You had already been with Les Bourgeois in Rocheport.
Actually, we had planted some grapes for fun out at the old Bayer Bioscience campus, but this was our first foray into doing it right. And I had the advantage. Doug knows everything there is to know about wine.
Yeah,
he hates it when I tell people. I introduced him Saturday night. I said he's a Kansas City treasure, and he just rolls his eyes. But it was a great Mark Twain line. He knows everything about wine, and I know the rest. So about wine, I mean. And but it was. I'm insanely curious, and I want to learn about everything. And my family having a horticultural background, I know something about trees and plants, and so I'd gotten to that part in the program, but I hadn't gotten to the next step. But Doug knew that, so it was a perfect partnership.
Yeah, and your dad was an arborist, right?
He
was the first one in the state.
He's the first certified arborist in the state of Illinois when they started that program. But my family's roots go back literally to the 1800s and selling trees to Frederick Law Olmsted for the Columbian Exposition in 1893. So we were dairy farmers apparently back in Europe, but we decided to branch out into trees. So.
Yeah, and you were born and raised on the banks of the Mississippi River, right?
I was.
Yeah, so
not
that's
born there, but raised there.
Yeah. Okay, but raised there. Yeah, exactly. So you were right into the, right into the environment and the land, and how to probably rotate crops and do all those things.
Actually, my
right?
passion was, even as a little kid, I loved the outdoors, learned about the ecosystems. I knew all the birds. I know the botanical names of trees. That's a byproduct of my father.
Right.
And Doug shares that passion for the environment as well as our passion for charity. We have we've never had a harsh word with each other. But being fair,
maybe in a little bit. Though.
Yeah. After this is over, you said
but it's it's a lovely business. You're making people happy, and you get to be creative. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and Doug, for you, your path, Portland, Oregon, I think it started.
I was born there.
Yeah,
I was born there. But we moved out to the Midwest when I was a little kid. So I actually spent some years here in Kansas City, and then we lived Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, et cetera. We moved around a lot. My dad was in the grain business and actually spent a season, as it were, as the chairman of the Board of Trade here. In KC. And so, I moved here right out of college, and it was supposed to be a temporary stop, and I liked it. And I found things to do here, and I found, a career here, if you will, in the wine business. It was just importing wine and distributing wine and selling wine. But the fun part, I remember the guy who hired me into the business, he was like, you really like writing wine lists, don't you? Because I was writing wine lists for a hotel here in town. I was like, yeah, I love that. And he's like, but you only write 2 wine lists. I was like, well, no, actually, I write 3. He's like, how would you like to write 100? I was like, that's what I would like to do. And so it was really fun. I was dealing with old school restaurants like Starker's, Le Bon Auberge, or La Méditerranée, places like that I was helping them write their wine lists. And that was just a gas. I really kind of saw that as something that I would do for as long as I could, and slowly learned about education in the wine business. And so I became a master sommelier and a master of wine, and started hitting the road basically educating people or consulting with people.
Yeah.
And some of those customers I still have, like United Airlines, and a lot of those customers sort of fell by the wayside. I'm so good at my job, they kicked me out after a couple of years. But it was fun. I mean, and I've spent the last 35 years or so really just doing that, just trying to teach people about wine, prepare candidates for the Master Sommelier, the Master of Wine, helping people set up their distilleries or their wineries or their restaurants or their hotels or cruise ships or what have you. And so I kind of thought that was good. That was fine. And the idea that I would fall into making wine just seemed unrealistic because I knew how much it took to do so. It just seemed really, really unlikely. And then this thing happened, and I've kind of frankly always lived my career as an opportunist, seriously, it's like, hey, this is a cool opportunity. And when you're on your own, which as I say, I spent 3 decades working for myself, you really do, as they say, you eat what you kill. And so you just kind of grab a gig here and grab a gig there and hope you can pay the bills and raise 2 kids and stay married and, not have your wife hate you too much. And
bring her home a bottle of wine every once in a while, right?
That does help. That does help. But, for me, this was one of those things of I'm not going to get a second opportunity like this. And I've seen how difficult it is if you're underfunded, if you don't have the right team together. It's impossible, frankly. And so I looked at this and saw we could actually do this. We could put the right team together, found some really talented people to help us get this done. And, those people are making it work. It's been really, nerve-wracking and a lot of sleepless nights over the last 7 years, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I'm pretty happy.
And Brad, for you, it's sort of a side gig for you, and I think you, after you established Midwest Trust, got it running, been running for the last 30 years, it's running beautifully, and all of a sudden you start to look outside and say, you know what, not only are you funding to try to put this together and get together on this, but I'd like to learn more about this and how much more do we do in it? How do we do this exactly, right?
Yeah, it's
you had the master to tell you.
Well, and what's interesting for me, my whole life's been a side gig, and Doug just described his whole life has been side gigs.
Yeah.
But if you're curious and you want to learn about something, you dive in with both feet. And 2 things that Doug said, points I would draw from what he said. One is it shows the generosity of spirit that he has. He helps people. We both have this tendency. We take in orphans. We help them, whether it's...
Yeah, you've taken in my wife and I.
No, I didn't mean it
orphans.
that way.
Yeah, no, we understand what you're talking about.
But I think that's a Kansas City value that we all share. We have... This town is accepting of people who come here. I came here later, and they take you in and they try to help you. And and you look at the charitable commitment from this community. Right. And Doug mentioned our first contacts were usually in charitable wine auctions, and we both are focused on the environment, charity, and trying to do something meaningful. But the other point I'd make is there's a parallel here. Picture the New York Times restaurant critic decides to open a restaurant. Doug has been telling everybody else his whole time. Now he's out there, and he leads with that fine chin.
Yes, right. Yeah, exactly. That makes it extremely interesting. But for you too, you did dive into this with both feet. I mean, you didn't just dabble. You went whole hog. You got the Bergman winery out in Bucyrus there, and
we planted our first grapes as friends and family. And it was,
what year was that?
That was 16. But what was funny is, we planted them. First time I touched the grapevine, I was planting them. First time I saw fruit or picked it, I was we had to pick our own. And I call up Doug and I go, Doug, we've never made wine. What the hell are we doing? And he hooked us up with Jacob Holman, who's a fine winemaker at Les Bourgeois over in Rocheport, and we were shocked at how good it was. And each year it gets better, and it's kind of like the hopeful in-law story. It's a lot better than we expected it was going to be, and we've just been blessed with the project that we're sharing, Echolands. But he helps with everything because he doesn't want me to embarrass us both
right.
by screwing up something else.
And so Brad's got the Bergman winery in Bucyrus at about 2200.
Yeah, we were
we're right across the street from one. 199th Guevara is the best way to say it. Also, the Les Bourgeois winery in Rocheport. Just drove by there not too long ago to go on the way to Cincinnati, Ohio. And then, of course, you two have collaborated with the Walla Walla, which is Echolands in Walla Walla, Washington. One of my first jobs in this business was in Lake Chelan, Washington.
Oh, no way.
Okay,
it's a beautiful area.
Right up the street there. Yeah, not bad. But when I was there, and we'll talk about this as far as Kansas, Missouri situation too, and now all of a sudden it's Walla Walla, Washington. When I was there, it was all apples.
Yeah,
I mean, it was apples and it was cherries.
For sure.
And that's all it was. And that was 1976, 77, right in that area. And it was still, all of a sudden, now it's all wine. And now all of a sudden, all these things are cropping up here in the Kansas and Missouri area. All these wineries and wine. And it's not a fad, because you have to have the climate and the soil and everything else in order to grow these grapes and all of your product that make it into really good wine, not just something you screw the cap off, okay, but really good wine.
Yeah, there's over 1,000 wineries now in Washington State, and back in those days, there were really, depends upon how you count it, but there were far fewer than a dozen. And 1975 is a little bit of a watershed year for Washington State, because there was a wine made by the group that became, or was in the process of becoming, Chateau Ste. Michelle. And they made this single wine called Cold Creek Cabernet Sauvignon in 1975. And I knew about Ste. Michelle. I knew about Washington State wines then, but I was a wine buyer at that point. And so I found bottles, and I started buying cases of this particular wine, 1975 Cold Creek in the Yakima Valley, because the most fun in the world in the wine business in Kansas City at that point was to blind taste somebody on that wine. They'd taste it and they go, well, this is Bordeaux, clearly. Because we, even back in the late 70s, early 80s, we were playing the blind tasting game. I had no idea I was getting ready for the Master Sommelier exam
We'll
or the
talk about
Master of
that
Wine exam, but basically we were. And that wine blew people's minds. I still wish I had a bottle of it. I'll bring it up every now and with the old, with the old guys in Washington, and people will be like, oh, you had that wine? I'm like, I had like 3 cases of that stuff. It was so much fun to mess with people's brains. It was just in the process of happening. And by the time I got excited about Walla Walla Valley, for sure, was in about 1983, 1985, I started importing into the state of Missouri about 13 different Oregon wineries because Pinot Noir was on the horizon and that was about to happen. And at the same time, I was like, well, I got to do the same thing up here in Washington State because being a native Oregonian, I was like, I got to represent my people. So it's exactly. So I remember discovering it. I was told there was a Safeway on Capitol Hill in Seattle I should go to, and they had this really great Washington wine set. You could actually go buy some Washington wines other than St. Michel. I was selling St. Michel wines already at this point. This is like 81, 82. And I went there and I bought a bunch of wines, and one of the wines I bought was Woodward Canyon 1981 Cab, which was Rick Small's first wine. It was kind of the first famous wine of Walla Walla Valley. Tasted it and said, to hell with this. I got to go see what these knuckleheads are doing. And drove, the 5 hours from Seattle to Walla Walla Valley and met Rick and met Gary Figgins of Leonetti and started bringing the wines to Kansas City. So it really is, in many ways, it was Kansas City's openness to new wines. I always try to describe to people how we're probably more like Denver than we are like St. Louis when it comes to our wine attitudes. We're like, we don't know about stuff, so tell us what we don't know.
Yes.
Whereas St. Louis has always been a bit more traditional. It's more like, well, we know about good French and Italian wines. We're from St. Louis.
You're just being nice now.
Yeah, afraid so. You can tell I was the state sales manager, so I had to deal with St. Louis and Kansas City both, and it was like two different countries.
Yeah. And so when Doug started talking to you about this and he wanted to get the Walla Walla thing and you guys started to collaborate a little bit, when did you really get into this mindset that I want to do this, not on my own because you have Doug to lean on about how to do it, and of course your son Alex, brilliant as far as wines, and I mean the things you guys talk about just blow me away. So when did you go? Let's make our own. Let's do our own winery here.
Like most things, I'm a historian, so's
Right.
Doug. I know you care about history too, but I always have my saying. The worst advice your parents, teachers, coaches give you is learn from your mistakes. Learn from somebody else's mistakes. So this man has seen everything. But there's also a really interesting history. Doug would speak to this better than I would, but the reason the United States is as wealthy as it is, everybody thinks it's the coast. It's really the fact that we have a river system that allowed us to penetrate this most amazing agricultural area that spreads from the Rockies to the Appalachians, and they were piddling around with the Erie Canal. Look at the existing structure that allowed all this bounty to flow, to other places. Right. Rivers were the highways, and the rivers here were not just important for that, but the people who came here from Europe wanted to make wine, and so they brought their European traditions and developed a wine region. This was a burgeoning wine area. We just happened to run into Prohibition where people took it seriously here, and other parts, they're like, "What? I live near Canada. What the hell do I care about Prohibition?" But when you look at the geography, you look at the history, you look at trying to avoid making mistakes, and we're intrepid, but we're not crazy. So as we went along, and one of the things Doug said is, besides ecology, you got to think about climate change too. So he helped me form the idea that we should play the warming of the climate.
Right, and as it warms, it has already become, I'm sure, Walla Walla Valley in the state of Washington, will it supplant California? Will it supplant Napa? And as everything moves up, are the wineries there starting to see this and starting to move themselves to go?
Yeah, there is, Frank. There is a lot of movement right now. A lot of people rethinking what they've done because the environment has changed, the climate has changed. So that certainly motivated us to find more land up in the foothills of the Blue Mountains where it's cooler and wetter. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the world, the rest of the wine world are making the same kinds of mental calculations as to what needs to change. So you have, in fact, a Spanish grape like Albarino is now legally being planted in Bordeaux. And if that doesn't, if that isn't a red flag for people to understand how much things are changing, I don't know what is. At least for a wine person, it's like, what?
Yeah.
And the idea that we have to alter the grapes that we're growing and the places we're growing them and the ways that we're growing them and the ways that we're making wine is pretty self-evident to anybody in the wine business. The scariest part about it for many of us are the fires, the wildfires that have happened up and down the West Coast over the last 10 years. I mean, they've always been there, but they're at a level of ferocity that we've never had to deal with before, as far as we know, at least not within our memories. And that creates problems that you can't really just work your way past.
Right.
You can't necessarily even move your way past that. So Walla Walla is kind of lucky in so much as it's not next to the same level of forest that Napa and Sonoma are. So, if I were in Napa right now, I'd be disturbed and concerned about two issues. One is, like I say, the continuous wildfires, and as soon as that smoke gets in the air, it can get in your grapes and create problems there. And for me, secondarily, the process of wine drinking is a bit faddish, like any other alcohol beverage. I mean, it really is what's cool, what's next.
Right.
And Napa was cool for, forgive me for, putting us all in the same era, but for, our generation, Napa was really cool. Guess what? Young people don't give a damn about. They don't give a damn about Napa. They're like, what's next? I don't want to drink what my mom and dad drank. I want to drink something cool and different. So, it's fun to be from an area that's still burgeoning, still in the growth cycle.
Yeah, God, that's amazing. And so the smoke thing, we've had the Canadian fires, the California fires, the Oregon, Washington fires. It sweeps over our area as well here. Have you had any issues with that as far as your grapes are concerned?
It's interesting. We don't really have a problem with it here in the Midwest, even though they burn the Flint Hills, the prevailing winds. I have this theory that everybody develop their communities upwind of their stockyards and their factories. And so if you look at in the middle of the country, everything's kind of southwest. But it really hasn't been an issue here. We picked up a little issue at one point because of Oregonian fires, but at Echolands. But,
in 2020. We saw a little bit.
But when you're making the highest quality wine, and we've got nothing but 90 scores for Echolands.
Right.
You're like, every little element matters to us. And one of the nice things, and this will probably sound wrong, but if it's not perfect, Doug, I've never seen anybody so perfectionistic when they're making the wine. He's checking every press run. He's sitting there just mothering these grapes. And sometimes smothering, probably,
or mothering. Never mind. We won't go to the other mother.
Yeah. Mother,
which
what?
probably happens.
Mother, what are you thinking? But what's so it's going to be amazing. But if there's something that's not perfect, we have other alternatives for it. We'll sell the grapes, do something else with it, and that's the passion that's in the Echolands project. And then we're experimenting. We're going to replant Cabernet Franc and Merlot. Out on the Bourmont property around the lake,
right?
And I think with climate change, we're going to be able to pull it off. And so people have got to adapt. Humans are reflexively adaptive, and they're going to adapt to whatever the changes are. And that's probably the most important sign of intelligence is your ability to adapt.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe 10 years ago, I'd never thought about drinking a Missouri or Kansas wine. Okay, I just never. In fact, I tasted some of them, and to me, a lot of times, it's probably I was drinking the wrong one. They were sweet, they were almost sugary sweet. It just was like that taste. I went, that isn't. I just didn't like it. But the evolution of the wine growing and the wine processing here has changed so much in the last 10 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, the irony here is that the wines of the Midwest have traditionally been sweet and been allowed to be made sweet because the grapes themselves are so damn tart. The great irony here is when people be like, oh, all the wines here are sweet. It's like, actually, dude, if there weren't some sugar in there, your face would suck inside itself because the tartness is so extreme. And it's the particular grapes that we grow here. The Cabernets and the Chardonnays don't do as well in the Midwest because of our torrid, hot, and humid summers and our incredibly cold winters. And maybe worst of all, the fact that those can happen within a couple of days of each other.
Yeah,
you know,
right,
that
exactly.
really creates problems. So as Brad was saying, if you grow next to a lake, you get a moderating influence. You know, there are ways to mitigate it. But in general, we've grown grapes that tend to be super fiercely tart. And what's happened over the last 10 and 20 years is people have learned how to grow them better so that they're not so fiercely tart. And people have realized that, you know, just because it's tart doesn't mean that somebody isn't going to like this wine. And so now we're seeing dry examples of wines, whether white or red. I'd say in general, the white wines of the Midwest have really figured out, or the white winemakers, I should say, have really figured out how to make really good white wine. And red wine is still a little bit of a hurdle to overcome. But I've been drinking these wines for 40 plus years and really, I would have to say, really being frustrated often at the lack of respect that people give to the winemakers here. It's a hell of a lot easier to make a Chardonnay in California than it is to make a Vignoble in Missouri. You know, quite frankly, it takes a lot more work to make a Norton than it does to make a Cabernet Sauvignon. And so, you know, I feel sorry for the fact that so for so long people have not given the winemakers here their due, but that's changing. And I was really glad to hook Brad up with Jacob Holman and Alex, his son. Alex has gotten intimately involved in the winemaking process and has been a real boon to our efforts in Walla Walla as well, because I've got a colleague I can talk to about a lot of these really granular issues that knows what the hell he's doing, and it is at the end of the day a technical process that you got to figure out how to shepherd these grapes into a bottle without screwing them up.
Yeah, and for you as well, you brought grapes from California to grow and to mix in with your winemaking process at Bergman as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there was some influence from him about which grapes should we bring in, or even from the California wine growers go, I'm not giving a Midwestern winery any of our grapes. We can't do this.
You know, actually, it's the opposite. They're delighted to sell their grapes. Yeah,
yeah.
Everybody wants to sell their grapes, particularly when they know they're going to go into something really good. And we have no trouble.
Then they trusted you to make
Doug,
sure they're
really,
grapes.
Doug,
yeah, right.
People knew Doug when you were in the area. That everybody knows Doug. And they go, we want to see what you're going to make with it. And people were willing to sell grapes to us, but getting back to your point, though, about your attitude about Missouri wines, had you gone to the University of Missouri, you would have a different attitude, because I was interviewing a fellow last night, and I talk to people all the time, and when they went to the University of Missouri, I said, well, what was your favorite teacher? Your favorite class? What was your favorite thing to do? Well, I went out to the A-frame on the bluff. All my firsts were there at Les Bourgeois. This fellow last night said, that's my fondest memories all occurred within 100 feet of the A-frame on the bluffs, and it's an amazing cultural artifact for that community. And
yeah, my daughter spent more time there than and when she went to University of Missouri than she did school. Okay, so
she'll carry that with her longer than she will.
She is still carrying it with her.
Father
to this
Guido
day.
Sarducci, the 2-minute university, everything you got from school. I'm sorry, all the educators out there, can be condensed into about 2 minutes now. So.
And Guido Sarducci was from Carneros in Sonoma, in California. He was a character.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
So what is the future? What is the future here? The future looks bright here, and the future looks bright in Walla Walla, Washington, and all the other areas. Now they're now growing and making wine in other parts of the United States besides the ones you think about right away, California.
Yeah, there's wine being made in all 50 states, and there's grape, wine being made in 48 of them, and the rest of, Alaska and North Dakota, they'll borrow grapes or they make wine from other fruits and things like that. So to me, that's a really good thing, and it's been kind of, sometimes I've been treated as if it's charitable work, speaking nicely, kindly of Kansas and Missouri and efforts in the Midwest. And I'm always like, no, that's actually a bit self-serving, because I learned a long time ago that even people who think they don't like wine, when you tell them the wine is made 10 miles from their house, they're like, oh, I'll try it. And it opens their minds. And the minute you have people willing to try wine, you have people willing to learn enough to discover the wines that they like. And I was a wine salesman, my job was to find a way to sell people wine. And I learned that making wine local for people makes wine more interesting for them. And I think it helps build community. I think it helps support farmers who need to have, there's far too much, of a break between people and their food and the people who create food. And if there's anything that we in the wine industry can do to help that, we damn well should do so. And I feel like we are doing that. And it has a snowball effect in good ways, at least for those of us who think that, moderate drinking wine is good. I know there's always going to be people who should
Moderation?
not. Yes.
Is there moderation, Brad?
It's oversold.
Yeah, it's true. Moderation in all things, including moderation.
Exactly.
Don't take that moderation
Moderately
thing.
moderate.
Yeah, don't take that thing too far. Damn it. Yeah. No, I really do think that it's a boon for communities, and it helps communities and farmers. And it's better for us to know where our food comes from. And wine, for me, still is a food.
Yeah. And Doug, I've spent many an hour at Bergman right across the street with our good friend here, Brad. And Brad would come in some days, and I'd have a glass of wine. I'd been through a little bit of wine, and Brad will come in. He'll have two other bottles. He'll pour a little into my glass of these two other bottles and go, yeah, try. That's my blend. That's the blend that I want them to make. You taste. You go, how'd you know that all three of those things would blend together to make this other wine, this really great tasting wine? You being a master of wine and a master sommelier, I know it's more difficult than that, but that mindset of just putting these things together and trying these things can create a whole new product. How does that work?
Well, it's mostly confusing, and the creativity is mostly experimental.
Yeah,
really,
like the days over at Bergman. Yeah, it's very experimental,
no.
yeah.
I mean, no, unfortunately, it is that 1 + 1 never equals 2 when it comes to wine, certainly when it comes to blending. So I think you build upon experience, and being in a relatively new area like Walla Walla Valley, which has only been planted seriously since the 80s, you don't have a lot of experience to fall back on. When you're in a place like Burgundy, they've been making wine there for over 1,000 years, maybe 1,500 years, and there's a great deal of experience to fall back on. They know which grapes work, they know how to plant them, they know where to plant them and how to treat them, and so certainly when people get impatient about the wines of Missouri and Kansas, I'm like, dude, we've been working with these grapes for like 20 years. Give us a break, We're going to figure this out, and I think we already are, and the only way you figure it out is through experience. You just cannot look at a piece of paper and go, okay, this is gonna work. There's just no way that wine particularly, people will talk about the electronic nose and these different ways that technology is going to help us make wine. It's all bullshit, because that's not how it works. Wine is a matrix, and so if you just push one thread one way or the other, it changes the entire matrix. And so simply looking at a bunch of chemical compounds on a sheet of paper, as the electronic nose does, and say, okay, that's going to be really good, it isn't necessarily going to be good. You just have to try a million different things. There's an old saying that 10,000 decisions go into a bottle of wine. Now, I don't know if it's 8,000 or whatever the hell it is, but it's pretty close to that.
Yeah.
It's one thing that the most fun thing you have to do in this business is blending trials, and it is. We never miss. I mean, I would go anywhere to go for a blending trial. It is hilarious, and it will never be replaced by artificial intelligence. And it's, as Doug mentioned, but one thing that Doug and I are looking at, I think we've got enough geographic interest, but Doug's got a lot of background in spirits and knows about that, and so we're doing forays into other things and doing collaborations, and so I think what we'll do is we'll have more of the full spectrum of opportunities and experiences to offer people. And the other thing I would say is, our magnum opus is we have this massive new winery going up in Walla Walla, and it will draw people because it is one of the most beautiful settings you'll ever see in the world. It looks like Tuscany, and you're just maybe a mile away from the Blue Mountains, and it is cantilevered with glass staring into the blues, and the view's amazing. And the grapes will be planted around the base, and it is Drew Bledsoe's place is there, the Figgins he mentioned. We got Kyle MacLachlan, if you're a Twin Peaks or a Dune fan, he's wanting to collaborate. So we've got we've got opportunities to grow because neither one of us are ever content.
Right.
We're always going to tinker. And
It will be a destination if it isn't already, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not just for people who can drive from Portland or Seattle or, Lake Chelan or, Wenatchee or, Leavenworth or one of those cities, but for all over the country, it'll end up being a destination spot, right?
well, I went to the Okanagan. My family wanted to go to Banff, and I drug them to the Okanagan, and
That's beautiful.
that was
there.
probably 10 or 15 years ago, and like nobody knew. They couldn't even sell the wine in the Okanagan. So if you go north from Walla Walla into Canada, there's a similar spot, cooler, a glacial valley called the Okanagan, and it's new. Who doesn't want to go find something new and,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
exciting?
Yeah.
But I think we've got there's enough change and diversity within where Echolands is that I think we're going to be able to develop that for as long as Doug and I can draw a breath.
Right.
I think so
And
too.
but you're going to expand and grow more and get a bigger, or is your place set and you're just going to grow and continue to grow with the plot that you have?
Yeah, I think the winery itself is purposely built to sort of limit the amount of growth, and that's because when you get to this 10 or 15,000 case annual limit, which is I'm just throwing a number around, but basically for me that's one kind of business, and when you're trying to make 50,000 cases of wine, that's a different kind of business, and so for me, what is right sized for Walla Walla Valley, what's right-sized for that particular place and the style of wines you can
Right.
get there is that 10,000 case or so level. What's been done here in the middle part of the country in the past with Les Bourgeois is certainly more in that 50,000 case level, and I think that's right-sized for more beverage wines and more everyday wines, because certainly the kinds of wines that we're making we're hoping up in Walla Walla are the kind of wines that go in the basement for a while, the kinds of wines that are more about the benchmarks that we think can be achieved here in the United States and here with the grapes that we're growing here that can stand astride anything that anybody else is making in the rest of the world. When it comes to the wines that are here in the middle part of the country, like I say, I think there's some just absolutely delicious white wines being made here. I will drag dessert wines from here around the world and blind taste people on things like Late Harvest Vignol in London or in Sydney or in San Francisco, and people fall out of their shoes when I tell them where it's from. I still remember the famous wine writer Clive Coates being blinded with me by Jimmy France, our wonderful restaurateur here in Kansas City, who blinded us on a wine, and I, Clive kind of looks at me, and I'm like, okay, well, I live here, so I guess I got to go first, and I kind of explained how it was, some chocolate notes and some blueberry notes and a touch of American oak, obviously where the wine has been aged, and the acids are pretty ripping here. Malic acid, kind of almost like a green apple note here. Very interesting. It's like a Merlot that's been grown in a cold site. And Clive grabs the, unfortunately, the half-written note at that point. He's like, oh yes, Merlot. I think Napa Valley is, very good acidity. And I was like, yeah, Clive, but the last time I tasted something I thought was Napa Valley Merlot with way too much acidity, it was Norton. Yeah. And so I think this is a Missouri Norton. And Jimmy's like, you got me. And Clive's like, Norton. Missouri, Norton. It was like, yeah, dude, it happens here.
And you could have, of course, reminded him that nearly all of the European grapes are on rootstock that came from the Missouri River Valley.
Yeah,
which is a very sore point, as I learned when I was sailing on a French ship to Antarctica. There were about 80 or 90, mostly academics on it, and everyone was sick on the Drake Passage, except, unfortunately, I was not. So I hung out.
Drank all the wine.
I drank wine with the crew, and of course, they thanked us for, World War I and our sacrifice, and World War II and our sacrifice, and I thanked them for Lafayette and Rochambeau and de Grasse to cut off Yorktown so that we could win, but I brought up the Missouri River rootstock, saving all of European grapes, and suddenly the air got very cold, not because we were heading to Antarctica, but they were very surly about that.
Yeah.
They took that very personally. I didn't say anything about food. I just said something about the wine. That was
They don't have a whole lot to hang their hat on, so they have to grab onto something and keep it, forever.
My mother's Norman French, and Bourmont was was a Frenchman who ran
right.
away from Canada and came down here and opened up the river. In fact, next year is Bourmont's 300th anniversary of being the first European to make wine,
Oh, wow.
which he did in Atchison on what we now call Independence Creek because of the Lewis and Clark. So it was almost 100 years before Lewis and Clark, and so you know there's a history, and Kansas Cityans should be proud of their history. You know, we're a fabulous agricultural experience. We're a transportation experience as well. When you think of Kansas City and its qualities, we had the best transportation system, you know, historically, because the river system you can't get much better, and the railroads you can't get much better.
Right. Yeah, the 1869 building of the Hannibal Bridge. I mean, that really put us in front of everybody else.
Which was a perfect hustle too.
It really was. Yeah,
they said they had the money and they didn't.
They had no idea. But you know, to me, it's part of why Kansas City is a restaurant town. Is we became a crossroads, and people would provision here, and you know, you're going to have to stay at least a few nights when you provision, so you need some place to stay and some place to eat, and you know, so restaurants, which is what I come from in Kansas City, it's in our blood here.
Right, and some people never left.
Right.
You know, we have all these
Yeah,
immigrants coming all across the United States, and German and Irish and Chinese, and you know, every other culture you can imagine. Native Americans were here. You had the Mexicans, the whole thing, and all that culture came right to the port. You know, just to Kansas City. So we got to get across the river, okay, and then we can continue on. A lot of people went, I've gone far enough. I'm good right here. Okay?
Yeah, well, there was money here, and you have
Sure.
Irish like the Pendergasts, who figure out,
That's right.
well, we can run some bars here, and then eventually we can run the city.
That's right. We are the city
install
at
a
that
president.
point.
Small
right.
details. But
Okay, I would be remiss, and I'm going to ask you both a question at the end, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. You know, you sort of glance over, well, I just did this Master Wine and Master Sommelier thing, and there's only like 3 or 4 in the entire world that carry both. I saw Psalm 1 and Psalm 2. I think it was just, to me, I was blown away. I just had no idea how hard it is to pass that exam, and I don't know, the unique individuals like yourself that have the ability to drag all that out just tasting or even just smelling a wine.
If you watch closely, you saw that Doug was actually administering the exam.
Yes, he
and
was,
You could see him in there, and it shows
That's exactly why I asked
he's
him
not
the
a
question.
showboating, immodest guy like some of the other people who were in
Oh,
that.
God, yeah.
well, and the truth is, I hate that first movie, and I really do, and I do not blame the filmmaker. I could blame a couple of my buddies, who are master sommeliers, because
you can if you want.
Yeah, no, I really will, because I think that they were eager to sell part of the story, and to me, not the good part of the story. They were eager to sell the story of a bunch of testosterone poisoned boys with their flashcards trying to fool each other and fool everybody else. And that the master sommelier, at the end of the day, the examination is supposed to find people who embody the spirit of hospitality. And the film, because somebody was trying to make an exciting film, they never understood that, much less embodied that. And the hospitality side of things is what we're supposed to be testing to find, and we generally do, but it is a difficult thing to do. It's very difficult to test somebody for heart, as it were. It's easy to test them for blind tasting or factoids and minutia, which is certainly what the exam becomes. But it is, we joke about it all the time when all the master sommeliers get together. My friend Tim Gazer will say, we're all on the island of misfit toys. Yeah. We're all a little bit weird in our crazy ways. We're all a little cray.
When did you realize you were a little crazy? When did you realize you had this thing about, well, I can smell, well, I know that smells like lime is in the rock, or the gravel, it's gravel from wherever, some dirt road somewhere.
Actually,
in France.
It was very much it's a revelation that came to me that I did experience that I started working at Plaza 3. And the wine steward there was this wonderful guy named John Skupny, and the first weekend I was there. I won a wine contest. It was like, who can sell the most wine? I sold the most wine. And so Skupny said, wow, man, you must know quite a bit of wine. I was like, dude, I'm an ex-actor. Yeah. I just am pretending to be John Skupny. And he's like, you want to come to a wine tasting this week? I was like, hell yeah, what are we doing? He's like, we're going to drink some Bordeaux. And I'm like, cool. I've heard those are really good. I had never had any, so I went to a wine tasting of Bordeaux. And I still remember that experience of going to several wine tastings in a row and suddenly knowing what it's like to walk into a room and go, what's that smell? What's that smell? And suddenly being, sort of woken up to a sense that I had never really focused on or maybe even experienced before. And it changed my life at that point. I was like, I got to do this some more and some more and some more and some more. And so here I am.
Here you are. Absolutely. One of the few people in the world. And of course, your undergrad degree was in theater.
Yes.
You did a one-man show on Beckett, I think, during part of the deal.
Yes.
You also wrote for the Midwest Punk fanzine. Okay. You love the punk.
Oh, yeah.
All the punk rock music.
Hell yeah.
You are a little cray-cray.
Oh, yeah.
You just a little bit. Yeah. Just a little bit on that side, which is great, which has really worked well for you. You and I are just crazy because we're crazy. It's one of those deals.
We're all acquired tastes. I think that would be a fair way to describe it. But it is interesting. I love the point he makes about service. And I draw a parallel because if you're making wine, you're serving other people, and the way you deliver it and the way you give them a beautiful place to enjoy it is really important to us. It's the same thing in my day job. If you don't have a servant heart, you do not want to be in the trust business because you're basically fixing other people's problems all day. And it permeates everything. It permeates everything that's good and noble about human beings, that they want to serve others. And this community really reflects that because I get to deal with most all the wealthy people in town. Both of you do too. But you very, very seldom meet somebody who's just completely selfish and self-absorbed. Mostly they're people who are concerned about helping others and look at the amount of money that goes into philanthropy here because of it, and the entrepreneurial spirit too. There's an amazing number of entrepreneurs, and sometimes I think we worry and spend more energy trying to attract other companies to come here, and we've got all these great homegrown companies. And what's interesting, if you look around, so at one time the wealthiest and then second wealthiest guy is from just up the river in Omaha, our sister city kind of. You look down to the middle of nowhere, Arkansas, in Bentonville, and you've got the richest people in Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, wherever else they live. If you look at Wichita, you've got the Kochs. Brother David, until he passed, was the richest guy in New York, of all things, and he came from. And so people create these businesses. And we also, because we're welcoming in the Midwest, most Western countries have got a demographic problem where they don't have enough young people to replace, because birth rates are lower. Right. Because of our willingness to bring people in and to help them, become part of our community, we're going to be a different kind of a thing, and we're going to succeed where. Italy's got a negative birth rate, and Japan, and just go around. China's going to have. China's been passed by India. Now they're going to be less than 1 billion by 2050. There's just a lot of things you have to look at from a big picture standpoint to decide where you want to live. And we did it for other reasons. We think it's cool and it's hilly and there's lots of fun things and
it's not too big.
And it's not too big, and people are accepting of you in ways that other communities, you have to live there for 5 generations before they let you join. And here, they're willing to take in strangers, and I think it's the most amazing thing about the
took
place.
me in, that's for sure.
Me
and
too.
That's why there's just something about Kansas City. That's why we do this. And here's the question. Okay, this comes from Sarah. Okay, my wife. I'm invited to dinner to Brad Bergman's. What wine do I bring?
I would say don't bring any because I've got so much wine
That's not
at
the
my
answer.
house.
That's not the answer.
At my house. Well, and, you'd like to say bring my current favorite, which both of you probably know what I'm drinking the most of. And partly I will tell you that what I'm drinking now is what I think is you won't want to cellar it for as long, so you try to drink things that are ready. one of the disappointing things for Doug and I is we'll make something that we know is going to be really good and when it's cellared, and we sell out of it. And, and it's
true.
like you can't. There's none left for us to even cellar. And although we had a tasting at the World War I Museum, and some of the things I thought would probably come away, I saw what was left, and it was a very, very little wine came away from there as well. But so I would say bring what you like. Maybe expand my horizon. Bring something you tasted that I've never tasted. You can't do that to Doug.
Yeah, I was just
if you go to
gonna say
Doug's
that.
house, you're not good. You know what? If you wanted to, you might. I remember one time a mutual friend of ours, his wife's family had a place on Howell Mountain that was not commercially available, and he brought that, and Doug figured out where it was from and what it was, but he'd never tasted it before.
Right.
So try to bring something nobody's ever tasted.
Yeah.
But please not sweet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And for a guy in Doug Frost who had a speaking engagement in Salina one time at Big Booty Trudy's. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Just what do we bring to Doug Frost's house if we want to bring a bottle of wine?
I feel the same way Brad does. I think I always tell people when people are like, oh, I've got a big dinner party and shouldn't I go to the store and get those wines that have the highest point score on them? I'm always like, no, unless the guy who's writing the review is coming to your house, why the hell would you buy the wine that guy likes? Buy the wine your guests like.
Right.
It really is about, it's about hospitality. Hospitality is about respecting each person's agency, each person's, singular characteristics and seeing those, respecting those. It's not about quote unquote tolerance. It's about, engagement. And so for me, I'll try to figure out what you like and make sure that wine is there for you. But if you bring something along, you might bring something I don't know about, and it will open my horizons. There's hundreds of thousands of wines in the marketplace, and I only know a pittance about most of them.
One thing, if you spend time with someone, you learn what their tastes are.
Yeah.
And that's, obviously, he takes it to a high art. But, Frank, you and I have spent a little time drinking wine. I know what you like, and I can figure that out.
Yep.
One thing we forgot to mention, and I think this will probably be something you can riff off of, but the Midwest does make really awesome sparkling. And
yes.
we forget about sparkling. And so the first time I went to Les Bourgeois, I tasted the sparkling, and I said, this is Veuve Clicquot. I mean, it tastes just like Veuve Clicquot. I don't know how you did that with the cooperage and everything else, but it was, and then Jacob said, well, I said, why don't we make a whole lot of this, and this would be great. He says, wait till you've made it. It is incredibly labor intensive, and we have a pet nat program, which I'm going to let Doug talk about, but. Sparkling is an amazing product that we can make in some interesting places.
The first big successful brand in the United States was in 1831, the Cincinnati Wine Company, which was making a sparkling catawba, and it sold about 1 million cases a year. Wow. It was a massive brand in the 1830s, for God's sakes. So we have a heritage and there is a lineage for sparkling wine being made in the middle part of the country, and successfully so. And I really do think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I've been trying to push anybody who will listen, including Jacob and Alex and such, to go for it, man. Do that. You guys make good sparkling wine. Keep doing that. Make more of them.
Talk about the pet nat too.
Well, yeah, the pet nat.
That's what the hip people like too right now.
Well, that is certainly.
Well, you are hipping me up. Then go ahead.
Yes. Well, pet nat is very much kind of the new groovy sparkling wine, and pet nat is short for Pétillant Naturellement. It's now a classified category of wine in Europe, in the EU, but that's only 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. They finally codified that name, and we just call it short pet nat. And what it is sparkling wine made as one would have made it 800 years ago. Indeed, if you go to the old abbey of in Limoux in southern France, back in the 1350s, there was a sparkling wine being made and being sold as a sparkling wine. A lot of times people will talk about Dom Perignon being the guy who invented sparkling wine. For the record, he did not think a wine that had bubbles in it was anything other than a flawed wine. The man believed that if you made a sparkling wine, you'd screwed up and somebody else needs to take your place, you know. So, but people have played around with this, what we call method ancestral, for a long time. And basically all you do is take a wine when it's fermenting, and when it's fermenting, it's creating carbon dioxide, and stick it in a bottle before it's done. Now, if you stick it in the bottle too soon, bottle blows up. You know, if you stick it in that bottle just at the right time, and put typically just a crown cap, you know, like a Coca-Cola bottle cap on top of it, you'll have bubbles in there, and that's essentially what a pet nat is. What we do that's different, and what we do that's similar to what's done in Europe, is we'll then disgorge it, which is a champagne process whereby we get all the dead yeast cells out of the bottom of the bottle, because it looks like sludge, and I don't like the idea that somebody has to get a tea strainer out.
Yeah, strain it as you pour it in a glass.
Yeah, that's just weird, you know. But there's a bunch of Americans who make pet nat, and they do it in that style. We disgorge ours so it's nice and clean and clear, and frankly we can't make enough to keep up with it. Right. Exactly as Brad said, it's a massive pain in the ass to make, because your timing has to be just right. And so you keep fermentation going really slowly so it doesn't get past your the moment you're going to want to bottle it. And then because of that, we can't make enough to keep it in stock, basically.
Wow, that's great.
And our first go, the bottles were exploding.
They exploding,
and of course, where they were stored, they call up. I happened to be out in Walla Walla. They call them, "Get this out of here now," because the bottles were blowing up.
It was a nightmare.
Yeah, just as long as you don't have worms swimming around the bottom of your sparkling, you'll be good. Okay,
We'll
leave the worm with the tequila, and we'll keep the sludge out of the sparkling.
This kind of gets back to learn from other people's mistakes. So,
exactly. Well, you two have been just incredible. Appreciate your time, and how busy you are. You're going to scatter to different parts of the country and the world here soon. And I wanted to wait until I could get you both in together. You would have been great separately, but I just thought the two of you would just be terrific, and just this is just perfect. And this is one of the reasons why there's just something about Kansas City.
You know what would be fun sometime would be to do this maybe a little bit later in the day and have us do it with wine.
I'm with you.
We could actually expand the group a little bit, and that might make for a really interesting show.
That might,
because really some things come out when you're sharing a bottle of wine. Yeah, I've
I
learned
never knew that.
Yeah,
I've never known that over there. No,
exactly.
All those stories, guys. Thanks so much. Appreciate
Frank,
it so much.
Thank you, Frank.
It's a pleasure.
And
thanks,
wonderful.
Sarah, for setting it up.
Yeah, you bet.
She's a fireball.
Thanks for being here. Don't
right.
forget, just
See ya.
something about Kansas City.